All right, so if you're ever in a situation where you are being detained and you don't know why you're being detained, there are three important questions that you're going to want to ask. I'm going to share with you these three questions in just a moment. So I am criminal defense attorney Hannah Akintoye, and believe it or not, most people who are being detained by the police don't actually know why they are being detained. Now, these may be questions that you've heard before, but what's really important to understand is why these questions are important. All right, so the first question is, why am I being detained? I like this question because it actually combines two questions in one. Not only does it answer the question of whether you're being detained in the first place, but it also asks why if the police officer is detaining you. And so when you assume that you are being detained, it forces the officer to answer the question of whether you're being detained in the first place. So for instance, if I was walking down the street and I was pulled over by the police and they wanted to ask me a couple of questions, if I ask the officer why I'm being detained, then it forces the police officer to think about whether the questions that they're asking you or the way that they're behaving you rises to the level of a true detention, as opposed to a police officer simply just approaching you to ask a couple of questions that are not supposed to be coercive. So really important to ask it that way, why you're being detained. That way, the police officer will have to actually make a determination about whether you are being detained in the first place and if they really have a right to detain you. The second question is whether you are under arrest. Now, the level of evidence that is needed for an arrest is much different from the level of evidence that is needed for a simple detention. And so if you ask a police officer whether you are under arrest, just know that if they answer yes, there usually needs to be a heightened level of evidence that they're going to need to actually put you under arrest. Keep in mind, a detention is completely different from an arrest. There's a lower level of suspicion needed for a detention as opposed to an arrest. For example, let's say a police officer has a warrant to go into your house and to search for weapons. What will typically happen is that the police officer will likely detain you while they are conducting that search. Why? Well, they don't want any evidence to go missing or they don't want any evidence to essentially be destroyed. And so that's why you are detained in a place to remain intact while they conduct their search under whatever search warrant that they have. But however, let's say as a result of that search warrant, they do in fact find the weapon, then at that point, they now have probable cause to arrest you. And so the level of evidence that is needed for an arrest is much different, like I said, than the evidence needed for a detention. Typically, if you are being detained and the reason why you are being detained has been resolved, or whatever questions or issues that gave rise to your detention has been resolved, then they should let you go. But if as a result of your detention, they learn that there is enough evidence to actually put somebody under arrest, then they will likely, in fact, heighten that police citizen encounter and now put you under arrest and probably put you in the patrol vehicle and transport you to the police station. So that's the second question, am I under arrest? And the third question that you are almost always going to want to ask is, am I free to go? Why is this question the most critical of the three? Well, for one, it tells you whether or not the police officer had any level of suspicion to hold on to you for detention or even for an arrest in the first place. Secondly, it also tells you whether or not a detention or an investigation is still ongoing. And then most importantly, asking a police officer whether you are free to leave forces the police officer to actually admit that they are either continuing to detain you or at that point they would have to let you go. So for instance, and I've given this example before, let's say you're pulled over by the police for a traffic violation. At that point, you are in fact being detained. But after the police officer issues you a ticket or a citation, at that point, they have to let you go. They can't start fishing around for additional things to search or additional criminal activity to look into if they don't have any level of suspicion to continue to hold on to you at that point. So let's say the police officer gives you a ticket or citation, but they don't tell you that you're free to leave, right? And instead they ask you to search your vehicle. A good question to ask at this time is, Am I free to leave? Whether or not the officer answers verbally or through their actions, you're going to get an answer. And this whole entire scenario is so important for court purposes, because this can actually make or break an argument that the police officer violated your constitutional rights. All right, so going back to the example that I was providing to you, if you're pulled over by the police, they give you a ticket or citation. They ask you additional questions about whether or not they can search your car. At that point, if you ask whether or not you are free to go, the officer will either have to say yes, that you are free to go and simply allow you on your way, or they will have to say no, you're not free to go. And at that point, if the officer never had any type of suspicion, whether it be reasonable suspicion to keep you detained for longer or probable cause to arrest you, then they are illegally detaining you. And any evidence that they obtain from you as a result of that detention from that point moving forward cannot be used against you in a criminal trial. And so asking that question forces the officer to really decide whether or not you should probably be on your way. Because if they do not allow you to leave, they better have a good reason for keeping you detained longer than whatever their initial suspicion was for detaining you in the first place. So essentially what I'm saying is that there are levels to this. There's a reason why a police officer can detain you at 2 o'clock and they can't keep you detained until 8, 9, 10 o'clock p.m. In order to detain you for an extended period of time, there has to be a reasonable amount of suspicion to continue to detain you. So I hope that information is helpful to you. If you have any questions, and I know these concepts are so confusing, but if you have any questions, just feel free to comment them below, or you can reach me on my website, mydclaw.com, and shoot me a quick message there, and I'm always happy to answer any questions that you have. As always, stay safe, and I will talk to you soon.